All right, get ready to dive deep into some Kenyan news today.
Mm.
We got a bunch of articles, most from Kenyans.co.ke and tyfolio.nation.co.ke. Seems like a really good mix of what's going on over there.
Yeah, looks like it. A real snapshot.
Politics, economics, social issues, even a little music. Going to be a fascinating deep dive.
Well, the goal today is to, synthesize all of these sources and just give you the most important takeaways from them.
Right, to make you feel informed without having to, go through every single article yourself.
Exactly.
Perfect.
Let's do it.
So let's start with the political landscape. There's definitely some tension around President Ruto. On one hand, he's pushing for accountability. He's, signing performance contracts with his cabinet and all that. But at the same time, he's facing this, serious pushback from religious leaders. What do you make of that?
It's interesting, very interesting dynamic. Because on one hand, as you mentioned, he's trying to project this image of a decisive leader,
Yeah.
someone who's focused on good governance.
Mm.
But then you have these, quite influential religious figures who are publicly denouncing him. They're criticizing his leadership, the economic situation. Some are even threatening a tax revolt.
Yeah, I mean, it really makes you wonder, is this a sign that there's growing dissent against his administration? What's really striking to me is the Archbishop of Nairobi, rejecting Ruto's donations, citing ethical concerns with the public fundraising appeals bill.
Right.
That's kind of a big deal, right?
It is. It is a big deal because I think it reveals a potential shift in the power dynamics between, the government and religious institutions.
Right.
So Ruto has historically enjoyed very strong support from the church, even donating millions.
Yeah.
But now the Archbishop's rejection, and you also have other religious leaders who are accusing the administration of a, quote, culture of lies and mishandling human rights issues. So, yeah, it seems like there's a potential erosion of that support.
It's pretty bold of these religious leaders to come out so strongly against the president. I mean, it's not something you see every day.
Right.
They clearly feel that he's crossed some lines. Do you think this could actually impact Ruto's political future?
It's certainly a development to watch closely, for sure, because you're right. These leaders hold considerable influence over public opinion. And if this criticism continues and gains traction, it could really damage Ruto's credibility and weaken his grip on power.
So while Ruto's busy trying to project this strength and control, it seems like there are some cracks starting to appear, right? And speaking of cracks, what about these rumors that Gachagua's loyal MPs are being ousted from some key parliamentary committees? This seems like a direct consequence of him being removed from office.
Absolutely. Yeah, even though Gachagua is no longer deputy president, the fallout from his removal is definitely rippling through Parliament. There's talk of Ndiniyoro, who was a really key Ruto ally, especially during the election, that he might lose his chairmanship of the Budget Committee. If that happens, it would be a major blow to Ruto's influence.
It's like a political chess game, isn't it?
Yeah.
One wrong move and you lose a key player.
Yeah.
Do you think Ruto might be starting to feel the pressure if more of his allies get sidelined?
It's definitely a possibility, because losing control of these important committees would make it harder for him to pass his legislative agenda, implement his policies. It could embolden the opposition, lead to more challenges to his authority.
So Kenyan politics, just as dynamic and fascinating as ever. But let's switch gears a little bit and talk about this project that could have a massive impact on Kenya's economic future. Kanza Technopolis, or as it's often called, Kenya's Silicon Savannah.
Right.
It's a super ambitious project, and Parliament just passed a bill to basically replicate that model all over the country.
It's a bold move, for sure. So the idea is to create these tech hubs in multiple regions, not just in Kanza. And the goal is to boost innovation, attract investment, and ultimately drive economic growth on a national scale.
It sounds really ambitious, but exciting too. I mean, it's kind of a high-risk, high-reward scenario, right? Kanza itself has faced its own challenges over the years. I mean, are there concerns that spreading resources thin like this or trying to replicate Kanza's success in other regions might be too difficult?
Yeah, you're right. Those are valid concerns. Scaling up a project like Kanza is a massive undertaking, so there are serious questions about, infrastructure, funding, attracting the right talent to these new hubs.
Right.
And yeah, there's always the risk that they won't be able to replicate Kanza's success.
Right. So it's a bit of a wait-and-see situation.
Yeah.
The potential is there, but so are the challenges. And speaking of challenges, let's talk about this county funding crisis.
Okay.
This is a story that's really impacting people's lives directly. We're talking about governors threatening to shut down county operations because they're not getting enough funding from the national government.
Yeah, it's a classic example of the tension between national and county governments, especially when it comes to budgets. So the counties are saying they need an extra 20 billion shillings to function properly, but the National Assembly is not budging.
So what's at the heart of this? Is it just about numbers, or are there like deeper political issues going on? What I find interesting is this, the revenue allocation law hasn't been enacted yet, even though the county allocation of revenue bill has already passed.
That's a really crucial point. The delay in enacting that law is creating a lot of uncertainty and frustration at the county level.
Yeah.
Because without that law, there's no clear framework for how the revenue should be shared between the national and county governments. And so, this lack of clarity is fueling this crisis.
So it's more than just a budget dispute. It's like a power struggle. Counties feel like they're being starved of resources and their autonomy is being undermined. And this delay in enacting the law just makes it worse.
Exactly.
Makes you wonder if it's like deliberate.
It's a possibility. The national government might be trying to assert its authority, control the purse strings, but whatever the motivation, the consequences for people are very real.
Yeah, I mean, if the counties run out of money, they can't pay their employees, they can't provide basic services,
Yeah.
healthcare, education, infrastructure, all that, that's a devastating blow to communities all across the country.
Absolutely. And, this is a situation that needs urgent attention because the longer this standoff continues, the more people are going to suffer. It's a reminder that these budget battles are not just abstract political games. They have real consequences for ordinary Kenyans.
Really puts it into perspective.
Right.
So while the national currency seems to be holding steady against the U.S. dollar after that dip, things at the local level, they're not as stable.
You're right. And, even though the shilling has stabilized for now, there are still these concerns about rising inflation.
Yeah.
The cost of living. And that could erode people's purchasing power, make it even harder to, make ends meet.
So it's kind of a mixed bag on the economic front, right? And to add another layer to all of this, Kenya just broke a global record with its e-citizen platform, generated over 400 billion shillings in revenue. That's pretty impressive. It shows how Kenya is really embracing digital technology.
It's an incredible achievement, no doubt. Shows how technology can be used to drive economic growth, improve government services.
It's a success story worth celebrating, but it also makes you think, does that success actually reflect a reality for everyone in Kenya? I mean, what about the people who are struggling with the cost of living? What about the counties facing budget cuts? The families that maybe don't even have access to a reliable internet?
Yeah, that's a crucial point. Economic progress doesn't always benefit everyone equally. So while some are reaping the rewards of Kenya's digital transformation, others are being left behind.
It's like this stark contrast. On one hand, this great example of innovation and progress, and then, people struggling to just like put food on the table and get access to basic services. It's a reminder to look beyond the headlines, right?
Absolutely.
Think about the actual experiences of all Kenyans.
I agree. We need to be mindful of those disparities, make sure that economic growth is inclusive and benefits everyone, not just a select few.
Now let's shift to some of the social issues making headlines. There's this chilling report about a string of murders and kidnappings in Nairobi's Eastleigh neighborhood, leaving residents absolutely terrified. It's a stark reminder that even in a busy city like Nairobi, certain areas can become incredibly vulnerable.
It's a very concerning situation. Some of the articles you sent detail some terrifying incidents. A businessman was shot outside Didi Plaza, a whole family was murdered, and their bodies dumped later.
Awful, just awful. So there's increased police presence in the area now, but is that really enough? What are the authorities doing to address the root causes of this crime wave?
That's the big question, right? Is it gang violence, organized crime, economic desperation, or, a combination of factors? Until those underlying issues are addressed, it's hard to see how the violence will stop.
It's a tough problem.
Yeah.
No easy solutions, but definitely needs a more holistic approach than just, more police on the streets.
I agree. We need to look at the social and economic factors that contribute to crime and develop strategies to address those root causes.
And speaking of issues that need a multifaceted approach, there's the problem of counterfeit seeds. The government's identified 6 counties as hot spots for the sale of these fake seeds. And that's a huge problem for farmers and for food security.
It's a devastating problem. Imagine investing in seeds and then finding out that they won't grow.
Yeah.
It's a financial loss for the farmers, but it impacts the whole country's food supply.
Right.
Think about potential shortages because crops are failing due to these fake seeds.
That's scary. And listeners, if you're in these 6 counties,
Which are?
go ahead.
Those counties are Bomet, Narok, Trans and Zoya, Ulasan-Gishu, Bungoma, and Nakuru.
You need to be extra careful when buying seeds. Don't become a victim of this. Now, on a more positive note, there's news of a data privacy win. A company got hit with a pretty big fine for bombarding a Kenyan with unwanted marketing messages.
It's a victory for data privacy rights. And hopefully, this sets a precedent for other companies engaging in similar practices. It shows that people are starting to push back against these intrusive marketing tactics.
It also makes you think, what are our rights when it comes to our data? I mean, how much do we really think about what information companies are collecting about us, how they're using it? I think we need to be more aware of that, don't you?
I agree. It's crucial to understand our rights and take steps to protect our privacy in this digital world.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah. And speaking of digital stuff, we have this story of a university student facing charges for spreading false information about President Ruto on social media.
Yeah.
It's a tricky issue, isn't it? I mean, where do we draw the line between freedom of speech and the spread of harmful misinformation?
It's a very complex issue, and it's a debate that's happening globally, right?
Yeah.
On one hand, people should be free to express their opinions, even if those opinions are critical of the government.
Right.
But on the other hand, deliberately spreading falsehoods can have serious consequences.
So how do we even begin to navigate that?
I think it underscores the need for, critical thinking and media literacy skills, being able to discern between reliable sources and misinformation, especially in this age of social media.
We have to become more discerning consumers of information. All right, let's zoom out a little bit and look beyond Kenya. Somaliland held its presidential election, and the opposition leader, Abdirahman Mohamed Abdullah, won in a landslide victory. Seems like a sign of political change sweeping across Africa.
It is. And Somaliland has actually functioned independently of Somalia since 1991. So this election victory is a significant step for them, but they still face challenges gaining international recognition.
It raises some big questions, right? What does self-determination mean in a region with such a complex history? And how do these unrecognized states actually function on the world stage? It's like a case study in the nuances of international relations.
It is. It really challenges our traditional notions of, statehood and sovereignty.
Okay, let's bring it back to Kenya and look at the healthcare situation. The new Social Health Insurance Fund, or SHIFE, has replaced the National Health Insurance Fund, or NHI, and it seems to be causing a lot of confusion and frustration. Can you give us a little context on this?
Sure. So both NHIF and SHIFE are basically national health insurance schemes, and they aim to provide affordable health care to Kenyans.
Okay.
So the idea is that everyone contributes to this fund, and then those funds are used to cover medical expenses when people need treatment.
So theoretically, everyone has access to health care regardless of income, right?
Right, exactly. But it seems like this transition to SHIFE has been pretty bumpy. There have been reports of patients having difficulty accessing care under the new system. The articles you sent mentioned patients being denied treatment because of registration issues or lack of communication between, the healthcare providers and the insurance fund. Seems like they're still working out some kinks.
That's worrisome. I mean, access to affordable health care is a fundamental right.
Absolutely.
And any disruption can have really bad consequences. What's the government doing to fix these problems?
Well, the health minister has acknowledged the challenges.
Okay.
And they say they are working to improve the system. They've also pointed to some successes, like the fact that most kidney patients are now benefiting from coverage under SHIFE.
So they're trying to balance acknowledging the problems while also highlighting the positive aspects, right? But for people being denied treatment right now, those successes don't really mean much.
You're right. It's important to remember that, behind these statistics, these policy changes, there are real people whose lives are being impacted. And so for those facing...
It's a reminder that we need to hold our leaders accountable. These services have to be available for everyone. And this criticism of SHIFE is happening alongside these wider concerns about how the government's handling the economy and social issues.
It's all connected, right? People are struggling with the high cost of living. And if they can't even access health care when they need it, it just fuels that sense of frustration.
It's a vicious cycle.
Oh.
Okay, before we get too bogged down, let's talk about something a little lighter. Remember that viral hit Mali Safi Cheeto? Well, the singer, Marakwet Daughter, is back with a new track.
Sherehe Kikwatu. Yeah, I've heard it. It's catchy.
She's really trying to make a comeback after, facing some online bullying and a dip in popularity. Makes you think about the fickle nature of fame, especially in this age of social media.
It is. It's a double-edged sword, right? Social media can make you famous overnight, but it can also be incredibly harsh. It's a reminder that even those who seem to have it all can face incredible challenges.
Yeah, it's a tough journey for a lot of artists and performers. That pressure to stay relevant, the constant scrutiny, it's not easy.
And the online bullying just adds another layer of complexity. It
Mhm.
can be incredibly damaging.
Absolutely. Okay, I think it's time for a quick break. We've covered politics, the economy, social issues, healthcare, even a bit of music.
We've covered a lot of ground.
Stay tuned. We'll be back soon with more insights from the world of Kenyan news.
Sounds good. Welcome back. Ready for more?
Yeah, we've got plenty more to talk about. Let's jump right into a story that really shows the challenge of corruption in Kenya. Two suspects caught red-handed, trying to swindle millions from a government official. At a restaurant,
Bold move.
they had already gotten away with like 1.7 million shillings before the authorities caught them.
It's a pretty brazen act, and it does make you think about how deeply rooted corruption might be, despite the government's efforts to combat it.
Yeah, I mean, are those efforts even working? Are we just scratching the surface here?
It's a valid concern. I think this case just emphasizes the need for vigilance, for strong legal frameworks to actually deter these acts. It's not enough to react after it happens. We need to address those underlying factors that allow corruption to thrive.
It's a huge systemic issue. Definitely needs a multi-pronged approach.
Wow.
All right, shifting gears completely. There's this fascinating story about a debate in Parliament over whether women should kneel before men.
Oh, yeah, that one got heated. So some male MPs argued that kneeling is a sign of respect in Kenyan culture, while female MPs obviously completely disagreed. They called it outdated and demeaning.
Yeah, it's like this clash of traditional values and evolving ideas about gender equality.
Absolutely. And it's a tension that's playing out not just in Kenya, but all over the world.
Society's trying to figure out how to balance those long-held traditions with modern ideas of respect and equality.
It's a complex issue, and there's no easy answer. It takes, open dialogue, willingness to listen.
Yeah, finding a way forward together, respecting our heritage, but also, striving for a more equitable society. Speaking of things that affect everyone, the weather. The Kenya Meteorological Department has issued a heavy downpour alert for 13 Nairobi estates.
They're saying potential for disruptions, so if you're in those areas, definitely take precautions and stay informed.
Good advice. Always good to be prepared, especially with unpredictable weather. Okay, some good news. The government has set aside 300 million shillings to repair and expand Manda Airport.
This is a good strategic move, I think. It's aimed at boosting trade and tourism in the Lamu region. Better infrastructure is key for economic development, makes it easier to move goods and people.
Creating connections, opening up opportunities, but these projects, they also need to benefit those local communities, right?
Of course. Development has to be holistic. It's not just building roads and airports. It's about improving quality of life for everyone.
Which brings us to another infrastructure story, this time in Nairobi. There was a protest that actually blocked Kangundo Road. Residents were demonstrating against poor services in their area.
It's a reminder that development can't just be about the physical stuff, the buildings and roads.
Yeah.
It has to include essential services like water, sanitation, electricity, healthcare. If those basic needs aren't met, then even fancy infrastructure projects won't help people's lives.
Really highlights the importance of listening to those communities, making sure their voices are heard. Development has to be collaborative. Back to international affairs now. There's an update on the Kenyan-led mission in Haiti. It's facing some pushback from the U.S.
Yeah, the U.S. is calling for a change in strategy, actually advocating for UN intervention. But Kenya is defending its leadership of the mission and highlighting the progress that's been made.
It's a complicated situation. Even with good intentions, these peacekeeping missions are tough. Competing interests, different strategies, unexpected obstacles.
And it's crucial to consider everyone's perspective, not just the powerful nations. The people of Haiti deserve to have their voices heard.
Absolutely. Their future is on the line.
Okay.
To the legal arena now. There's a story about a Kenyan widow who was fined 825 million shillings.
Wow.
The court found her guilty of being involved in her late husband's drug trade.
It's a huge penalty. Raises questions about the severity of punishment, and the complexities of dealing with criminal networks. While holding people accountable is important, some might argue that this fine is a bit much.
Especially since she's a widow who's already lost her husband.
Exactly.
It also makes you think about the families. What happens to the children, the dependents, when someone gets hit with such a huge financial burden?
It's a ripple effect. Justice should be paired with compassion. We have to think about the broader societal impact.
Okay, wrapping up our politics section.
Mm.
Former President Uhuru Kenyatta just got a legal win.
Mm.
A court ruling reinstated his wing as the rightful leadership of the Jubilee Party. This reverses a previous decision that had favored those rebel politicians within the party.
So even though he's not in office anymore, Uhuru clearly still holds some sway.
It shows his legacy, the loyalty he commands in certain parts of the political scene. Also highlights how complex Kenyan politics are. Power can exist even after you leave office.
Exactly. It's not just about holding a specific position. It's about building relationships, navigating those power dynamics.
All right, a story now that's both disturbing and tragic. A man opened fire on police officers in Nairobi.
It's a terrible incident that ended with the suspect being killed. Reports say he had been caught on CCTV targeting a local leader. When officers confronted him, he opened fire, and that led to a shootout.
It's a tragic outcome, and it reminds us of the dangers that law enforcement and ordinary people face. It also brings up the issue of gun violence in Kenya and the need for strategies to get those firearms off the streets.
Absolutely. We have to address the supply of guns, but also the root causes of that violence. Things like poverty, inequality, social unrest. It's a complex problem.
It's about creating a safer society for everyone. Now, some good news for Boda riders.
Oh, yeah. The government is targeting those digital lenders with a new bill. And this is significant because so many riders rely on loans for their motorcycles, but they often end up in these cycles of debt. High interest rates, predatory practices. This bill is trying to regulate that.
Creating a fairer financial system, one that doesn't take advantage of the most vulnerable.
It recognizes that the boda sector is vital to Kenya's economy, and it deserves to be supported.
Okay, one last story before we wrap up this section. Speaker of the Senate, Moses Wetangula, has issued some new rules for MPs.
About their use of the SGR, the standard gauge railway.
Right. Seems like the government's trying to cut costs, encourage MPs to use the train instead of flying.
It makes sense financially, fits with their focus on being responsible with money.
But it's definitely created some buzz. Some MPs are all for it, saving money and all. Others are complaining about the inconvenience, especially if they have to travel far or have a tight schedule.
It's that classic government dilemma, trying to balance saving money with making sure things actually work smoothly. It shows how tough it is to find solutions that please everyone.
It's a good point. Government decisions are rarely simple. Lots of competing priorities to consider. All right, that's it for this segment. We've covered a lot. Corruption, gender dynamics, infrastructure, domestic and international politics.
It's been quite a journey. Really shows the forces shaping Kenya today.
Stay tuned for our final segment, where we'll dive into even more stories and discuss what all of this means for the future of Kenya. And we're back for our final segment. I'm really feeling informed after all this.
Lots to process for sure. We still have some good stuff to cover, though.
Right. So, more on those bodas. Seems the government's plan to target digital lenders with a new bill, it's getting mixed reactions. Not everyone's happy about it.
Yeah. Makes sense it's complicated. Lots of people support the government stepping in, trying to stop those predatory loans, right? Protect the riders. But then some are saying, hey, too much regulation could hurt the whole fintech sector, even make it harder for people to get loans when they really need them.
It's a tough one.
Yeah.
Got to find that sweet spot where you're protecting people but not, stifling the whole industry.
Exactly. Balance is key. Think about all the possible consequences, good and bad.
Now back to Parliament.
Yeah.
Speaker Moses Wetangula, he's laid down the law, so to speak. New rules for MPs, all about the SGR.
The train, right?
Yep, the standard gauge railway. Seems the government wants them to take the train instead of, flying all over the place. Save some money.
Makes sense budget-wise. It's definitely in line with their whole fiscal responsibility thing they've got going on.
But of course, MPs, they got to have their opinions. Some are praising Wetangula, less spending, good for the country. Others are, well, let's say they're not thrilled about train travel, especially if it's a long trip or they've got a packed schedule.
Classic example of how government decisions, someone's always going to be unhappy. Save money, great, but maybe not so practical for everyone. Hard to make everyone happy.
Always trade-offs. Well, I think that about wraps it up for our Kenyan News Roundup. We've been through it all: politics, economy, social issues, technology, even weather, and some music.
Quite the mix.
It's been a really fascinating look at Kenya today, all the different things going on.
Definitely.
So one last thought for our listeners. Think about everything we've discussed, all the changes happening: economy, politics, social stuff, technology. What do you think is next for Kenya? What are you hopeful about, and what worries you?
Good questions to ponder. Ultimately, it's the Kenyan people who will shape their future. They've got the resilience, the creativity, that's what matters.
We've given you a lot to think about today. I hope this deep dive made you curious, maybe even inspired you to learn more about Kenya and what's going on there.
That's what we hope for. Staying informed, engaged, that's what makes a society thrive.
Couldn't agree more. Until next time, keep on diving deep.